So in today's video, I'm talking about why ghosting happens in codependent relationships and how to stop it. So if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So why are people ghosting you? It's mostly because they don't know how to handle the intensity of our needs. Because when we're stuck in codependent relationships, we look to others for our value and our worth and approval because we don't know how to give it to ourselves. And unfortunately, that creates a lot of pressure in that relationship where the other person gets tired and worn out, and eventually they start to feel trapped. If you've ever experienced this, say me too in the comments. But let me tell you, you're not bad or wrong for needing a lot. That's part of how we're built as codependent people, is we do have unmet needs that we tend to put into our relationships. And that's why you're here. So when we're being ghosted, it takes us by surprise. And another factor here is that most people don't know how to end relationships well. That's why ghosting someone is so common. Maybe they send you a letter or they stop responding to your texts because they don't want to hurt your feelings, or they simply don't know how to tell the truth that it's too much for them. So this also happened to me about 20 years ago, where I had a friendship end where she wrote me a letter, and it was totally by surprise. I had no idea this was coming. And I really felt like the victim of it. I could not understand why she ended the friendship. I couldn't believe she cut me off like that. But here's the thing. It's really easy to blame the other person when we're being ghosted. That was my first reaction, to think, oh my God, I didn't do anything wrong. What's wrong with her that she did this to me? If you've ever felt like that, I totally get it. Say me too in the comments. You're not alone. But it was a humbling lesson for me because that friendship ending could have been the turning point in my recovery, but I wasn't willing to look at my part in that friendship. So I was doomed to repeat it. And this is very common in recovery, where if we don't get the lesson, we just repeat it again later. That's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just a part of recovery. So what do you do about being ghosted? You do what I did. I finally got to the point where I had to be willing to look at my part in that friendship. What caused her to ghost me? And I came up with a really simple answer that many people who struggle with codependency are going to relate to. It was my neediness. I needed way too much in that friendship, and she got burnt out. Looking back, my needs were way too much for her to handle, but I couldn't see that. I couldn't see the part I played because I was attached to being a victim and feeling so hurt by her ghosting me. And that's also part of this recovery process, is to realize that, you know what, we have a part in any relationship. And that can be the turning point in your codependency recovery, is to start looking at what part you played in a relationship ending. Now, when another friendship ended for the same reason 7 years ago, I got the lesson. I knew it was my neediness because it was obvious to me at that point in my recovery. But it was still a really hard pill for me to swallow. And I still felt like the victim. But I was determined, because the pain and the grief were so intense, to learn the lesson. And there was a harsh truth I had to face. I was being too much. And there's a lot of pain and shame around being too much, but I had to learn to embrace that as part of my codependency. I was too much for people. I was too much for myself. But saying that without judgment is part of recovery, because we have to name what isn't working so that we can heal it. And I talk a lot more about this in my Healing Codependency course, where I have you take an inventory of certain behaviors that are harming your relationships. Because when I did that, everything changed and my relationships got a lot healthier. So another thing you can do to stop being ghosted in codependent relationships is looking at your neediness. Look at the areas where you are too much. And I know this is hard, but this is part of what I had to do. I had to look at the fact that I was texting and calling people way too often. I was asking for so much emotional support pretty much on a regular basis. All of my phone calls were around support. They weren't lighthearted calls. They were all about growth and pain and discovery, which is part of the recovery process. But when we put all of our emotional eggs in somebody else's basket, we drain them and we create way too much pressure on that other person to be our savior, which actually is our part of being ghosted. Another thing you can do to prevent being ghosted is to break the cycle. And part of how we break the cycle is looking at that neediness and doing something with it. For instance, learning how to validate yourself. Learning how to see the good in you and validate when you do something well. Validate what you need and start addressing your own needs in your codependency recovery. Because the more we put all of our emotional eggs in one person's basket, the more we're going to actually risk losing that relationship. And I don't want that for you. So part of how you reverse that is to learn some ways to validate yourself. Another thing you can do is to start practicing good boundaries, because this is going to help your relationships not be so one-sided. Because when we're not setting boundaries, we're really not telling the truth. We're pretending that everything is okay, we're always being available, and really that's not healthy for anyone. That sets up our relationships to be one-sided, and I don't want that for you. Another thing you can do to break the cycle of being ghosted is to recognize your emotional triggers. This is key because we all have triggers of feeling abandoned, left out, worrying that somebody is going to be mad at us. Those are all really common fears in codependency. But when you know what your triggers are, that's going to help you deal with them directly and not look to your relationships for comfort. Because the goal in our recovery is to build a healthy foundation within ourselves so that you can have healthy relationships with others. And that's what I talk about in my next video, the secret to healthy relationships. So watching that video is going to be your next step. Thanks so much for watching.